All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate the gift of your all's presence and the gift of you all being with us today for our Student Voices on the Election panel as part of National Voter Education Week. First off, happy National Voter Education Week for all those who celebrate and for all of you who are working really hard on your campuses to register folks to vote, educate them about their options of how to vote, and get involved for the upcoming elections on the state, local, and federal level. And we also are really grateful for the amazing faculty and staff and administrators and students who are really leading the charge on your campuses to make sure everybody in your community has access to vote. My name is Will Brummett. I have the absolute joy and privilege of being the Director of Student Engagement at Campus Compact, which means I get to work alongside and learn from some of our incredible student leaders across the country, and which you're going to hear from 4 of them today. All of the 4 students you're about to hear from are all current students at different points throughout different parts of the whole country, whether it be from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin to Texas to Massachusetts. All of them have different majors or interests or backgrounds, but they all have a similar passion for getting involved in their local communities and using the power of voting as one method of change that they use to create change in their local and national communities. We're really excited to spotlight some of them and some of their great work. A couple of housekeeping instructions. If you have questions throughout, please don't hesitate to drop them in the Q&A. We'll be sure to have a Q&A at the end where we'll ask some of our panelists these amazing questions. If you need transcription, please don't hesitate to use transcription in the bottom of your screen. You should be able to have this conversation transcribed in your own language, whatever you need. And lastly, we are going to be recording this so we can post this and share this later on. So if you do have to leave for any reason, you can come back and watch the recording later or share it with any of your colleagues, friends, students, or even family members who you think this is a great conversation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Again, I'm really grateful for our amazing panelists. And I'm going to actually start our panelists off with a very quick sort of starter question, which you talked about, and they have some amazing answers to. And I'm going to first just ask every student just to introduce themselves, to tell you a little bit about their name, their pronouns, where, in what institution they are calling from, and what year they are in school. And then I asked every panelist to sort of tell us what was their sort of first election memory. What was the first election they either voted in or the first time they remember being involved? And I gave them open parameters. So this could be a personal election they had in their elementary school, or it could be a presidential election they got involved with. But I would love each panelist to start off by just again telling us your name, your pronouns, your institution, and then your first election memory. And with that, we're going to first kick it off to Mandy. And Mandy, I'm going to spotlight you and welcome you to the panel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mandy. I'm a senior at Brandeis University. I use she, her pronouns. And the first election that I remember was I was in kindergarten in 2008, and my elementary school was a polling place. So I remember seeing people lined up to vote for that election. And then the first election that I participated in once I had turned 18 and was eligible to vote it was a 2022 primary in my home state, which is Florida. And the very first person that I voted for was my now congressman. And then about a year later, I actually ran into him and I told him, I said, "Hi, you're the first person I ever voted for." And he said, "Thank you." So I appreciated that.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mandy. And that's a cool thing to get actually to meet the elected officials you voted for as well. All right. Next, we're going to go from the beautiful, cooler fall of Massachusetts to the hotter but still pleasant fall of Texas. We're going to go to Karime Flores in Texas Women. So, Karime, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karime Flores. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a junior studying political science at Texas Women's University. My first big election memory is definitely the 2016 election. I luckily had teachers who were very into getting us involved in politics, and we would watch CNN 10 in my sixth grade classroom all the time. And I would watch the primary elections and a lot of the rhetoric being spewed by one of the candidates on the Republican Party really affected my personal life because I grew up in a border town, and that really got me invigorated in politics and engaged in politics. Because of that, I'm here. But the first election I voted on was the 2022 governor's election in Texas, and I voted for Beto O'Rourke, who I also got to meet yesterday.
Which is also awesome. And we love that you got to meet someone you also voted for, which is really, really amazing. All right, next we're going to go up to a state that you may or may not know is in the news. there's a couple things going on. But the state of Wisconsin is a hot button state, and luckily we have an amazing student leader at UW Madison. Aman Jolt, I'm going to pass it to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Amanjot Kaur. I use she, her pronouns. I attend the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I'm in my third year. My earliest election memory is actually kind of random. I remember that my uncle and aunt used to have a bonsai tree with Obama's face when the 2008 election was happening. And so that's my earliest election-related memory. Um, in terms of actual elections, I think later than that in 2016, I remember watching a lot of the primary debates. In particular, I was very interested in the issue of healthcare. Um, and the first election I actually voted in was in 2021, and it was a school board election when I was 18. And the person I voted for did not win, but that's okay. It's always good to try.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you sharing that. Both like sometimes the election don't doesn't turn out the way you want to, but the Obama bonsai one I also could have forever in my memory for that. All right, lastly, we're gonna go to the one and only Vincent, who's calling us from the amazing state of Pennsylvania, or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I think it's Commonwealth. Sorry if I'm offending anybody from Pennsylvania, but it was Commonwealth. But Vincent, I'm gonna go to you to tell us about you and your unique first election story.
Hello, everybody. My name is Vincent Caminici. I am a second year student at Northampton Community College. So it's a community college, so I'll be transferring to a different school in the coming year. So yeah, my first election I think I remember would be 2012 when my mom was a very firm supporter of Barack Obama. And I remember just to be annoying, I would be like, I support Romney, haha. And I remember like getting math tutoring or something, and there was like a Romney magnet on the fridge. And yeah, she wasn't very happy with that. Then I grew up in Iowa. So 2014, we had a US Senate election. And I remember my mom hating the candidate who's now Senator Joni Ernst. And my class, when she was in office the next year, was like booing her. In 2016, I was very, very involved because my mom was very actively involved with the Hillary Clinton campaign for president in Iowa. But the first election I actually voted in was 2021, the year I graduated high school. And that year, school board elections, local elections, but one of the first people I ever voted for was actually myself because I ran for judge of election that year. And I'm still in that position.
Awesome. I love that. I love the story. And I love how your entry to politics was like, I just want to sort of get on my mom's nerves. And so whoever you're not voting for, mom, I think a lot of people can relate to that as well. So all right, y'all. So we're really excited to sort of highlight these amazing students. As you can sort of tell, they're passionate. They've got a lot of experience. They've been thinking about these issues for a long time as well. But we're going to also highlight each of them in some of the specific ways that they are making change in their local communities and how they're sort of approaching it. So with this, we're going to ask all of our panelists their questions, and we're going to give you all the floor to sort of center the student voice. So Joe, we're going to go to you first to talk about UW-Madison. And one of the things I'm just really curious about is obviously we hear a lot in the news around like the energy and Wisconsin being a swing state and what's this look like in college campuses. So just tell us, like, what is the energy like right now? What are you noticing in terms of students getting organized around voting or getting excited to be registered to vote? But then also we talked a little bit prior to this call that you've not only switched from doing on-campus voting leadership to but also doing local leadership actually in the city of Madison. So talk to us a little bit about what made you also want to shift from not only doing just on-campus voting advocacy and sort of access, but also off campus in the community. So I'll pass it to you.
Oh, lots of good questions. Yeah, working on civic engagement in Wisconsin, especially during a presidential election, is a lot. Campuses, especially UW-Madison, are areas where most of the energy is like the most active. It's not just students, it's also just the presence of a lot of like outside political groups and speakers coming in and media and it is very much like a constant rampant environment. I've been working in civic engagement since I first arrived at UW, long before that too in high school, but like throughout my time at UW, I've been involved in every election, including like the 2022 midterm, which I thought was pretty hectic, and then I realized this semester that I had no idea what I was talking about. And even just like the Wisconsin Supreme Court election in spring 2023, which was such a massive success in terms of college student turnout that it made national headlines. But the current situation at UW is that there's a lot of student organizations, a lot of civic engagement, interest amongst students, and various groups constantly tabling and reaching out and getting involved, and lots of students who are election officials and are interested in becoming election officials and planning on poll working, which is really exciting and promising. Um, there is also at the same time like a lot of people who I think are exhausted from all of the ads and news and content. Wisconsin being a swing state gets so much like ad and rally and otherwise like attention from campaigns that it might be overwhelming for some students, whereas it's very invigorating for others. Um, Usually, when I find students who are really passionate about these things and are looking to get involved, but find campus to be kind of overwhelming or are starting to get to a point with campus engagement where they feel frustrated, whether it's with the university itself or with students or whatnot, I try and get them into election officialing. I really enjoyed being an election official. I think it's a great way to get involved in voting in elections and learn a lot about the actual process of how elections work beyond just why students should care and why they should vote. I've learned a lot about election law and procedure as a result of being an election official and going through the voter registration process through so many elections with so many students and people in the city. And it's also allowed me to focus on communities that I really want to turn out to vote and that are not receiving much outreach. For example, I'm South Asian and I grew up in a Sikh family, and voter registration, like temples, mosques, Sikh temples, are it's not very common. And so one of the things that I've been doing through a nonprofit that I'm part of called Chupko Vote is going to various like interfaith and religious sites throughout the city and registering people to vote. And it's a really great way to combine like my passion for getting my community involved and getting this community that is usually not like reached out to involved. And then also like being able to continue working with communities on civic engagement and sharing my love for voting and elections and democracy.
I love that. I love that so much how you found multiple ways to get involved. Not only your like literally your campus community, which I think oftentimes a lot of people just associate, but like your local community, your like literally the government, how does it work, but also your religious community, your spiritual community. That's also amazing. I love that. That sort of is going to lead me to our next question, which is I'm going to come to you, Vincent, for this as well. So Vincent, you sort of already told us a little bit about your backstory, but you've got a great amount of experience. You've worked with the Andrew Goodman Foundation, you've done voting on campus and things. But also, you decided to run for judge of elections, which some people don't even know like what that is. Like, do you wear an outfit? Do you have a nice wig? Like, what do you do as the judge of elections? But just talk to us a little bit about that around, why did you run to become a judge of elections, Vincent? And why do you think it's so important for students, especially, to sort of, again, be involved in ways that aren't just voting, but also not to count themselves out as potentially people to run for elected office?
Yeah, I think that, and thank you. That's a very good question. I would say that, yeah, I ran. Okay, for first outfit, I wear a purple polo to try to have like a bipartisan, nonpartisan vibe. So I always wear a purple polo for every election I'm working. I originally ran as I said, when I was 18, so it was first election, mainly because I wanted to be involved in some way. I've wanted to be in some kind of elected office for a long time, and I wanted to see, like, start from the bottom, right? So I wanted to see, what's this like? Learn more about the election system, help out, whatever. And so I ran. I was the only candidate. No one runs for this thing, and that's how I got on. And pretty much that. I think that, and it's a very educational experience, right? It's an interesting office because it's kind of a mix of like an executive and a judiciary position in a very tiny place where you only have a couple other people working in the entire polling booth. But yeah, I very much recommend I recommend students to at least try to understand how their polling places work. Obviously, try to be a poll worker if you can, especially this year, because this is a very I've never worked a presidential election, so we're going to see what this is like. The primary, there weren't a lot of people, but we're going to see. But yeah, it's very important to be involved outside of just voting, because we live in a society, and we're supposed to be working together to try to make things, to try to build our communities up and try to work with each other, rely on each other, and you need to kind of understand your community to know what it needs and to also know what others in your community need. And I think the best way to do that, and it can be little things like I am served 2 days in a year basically in my position, but I still get to talk. I get to talk with older folks who work there, who have worked there for a while, and they get to tell stories and talk about things in the community. I get to understand that. Aside from that, I also volunteer at the farmers market, the Easton Farmers Market in my city, and so because of that, I have a better sense of the pulse of the community. And still, I'm still learning, so it's not as great as like the mayor or something or someone, but it's very important that people are involved, because a lot of times I think especially you're cooped up in your room, you might not you might feel like the world is a very lonely place, and sometimes it can be, but I think the thing is that we need to try to interact with our common humanity, and that involves connecting with our common community, and that sometimes that might be harder to reach out to because you could be in a more rural area, but if you can, there's always people. There's farmers, there's other workers, there's people who are trying to make a community the best they can be. And if you can, I recommend being involved with that at the very least, even to see a lot of who these politicians and who you're fighting for when you are voting, when you are trying to help your community, other than just yourself.
I love that. Thanks so much, Spencer, for that. I love that I love how also you're sort of helping us think about, when we think about National Voter Education Week, it's not just about like who the candidates are, the issues you care about, but like who is actually your community? Who is that common community you're committed to? And how do we get outside of our bubbles to do that? And I love that you've done that in a variety of ways. And do that. I think it's a wonderful model. All right, so we're next gonna go down to Curry May. I'm super curious. Okay, you're at Eagle Pass. You're in the area, you're part of the Eagle Pass Coalition, you're doing that. And oftentimes in the election, it's always about like the only issues, like it's the border, it's immigration. That's what Texas is synonymous with. But we also know there are a lot of multitude of issues that matter to you and matter to your community and get people out to vote. So I wanted to sort of offer you the opportunity just to sort of talk about what do you feel like national media narratives get wrong about your community, not only at Texas Women's, but also about your Eagle Pass community, and sort of what do you feel like actually is motivating people to show up and want to register to vote or get involved, or on the flip side, maybe what's not incentivizing people or putting a barrier for that.
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm gonna answer this in kind of two parts, with focusing on Eagle Pass and then on TW. But immigration is a huge issue in Texas, and I have a very personal connection to it. I'm the proud daughter of Mexican immigrants. I'm also a proud fronteriza. I grew up on the border. But according to Unidos US, which is a nonprofit focused on Latino politics, the top 5 issues for Latinos ages 18 to 29 years old are inflations, or the rising cost of living, jobs in the economy, housing costs, healthcare, and then immigration and border security. And I think Eagle Pass and the border is always used as kind of like political theater, talking about the immigrants and the crime, and my own personal lived experience, the lived experience of the people I know in Eagle Pass and other border towns. That is not our lived experience. Our lived experience is of this beautiful bicultural place we've always been growing up in and have loved. And immigration matters to us, and it's very interconnected into our identity. But the narrative that is being pushed by the Texas government and by one of the presidential candidates is not the experience that we have at the border. In terms of TW and Jolt, like I said, immigration is huge in Texas, and the work that I'm doing in Jolt is registering Latinos to vote. And I see all the time that these Latino students that are descendants of immigrants are consistently connected to this identity of immigration, and like have relatives, so they are motivated by that, and but also motivated by the issues going on right now, right? Latinos aren't a monolith. We're not all related to immigrants. We're not all first gen or second gen, and we care about this inflation that I mentioned, and healthcare, because Latinos are the group of minorities that are the most uninsured in healthcare. So that's very important. And I just wanted to end my response saying that 40.2% of Texas is Latinos, and the number is continuing to grow, and we're continuing to slowly outnumber European descendants in Texas, and according to the Texas Tribune. And it's important to continue to advocate for Latinos and kind of our state government, but also national government, focus on this important demographic who is going to make a change in voting in the future and continuously.
I love that. Thanks so much, Carrie, for doing that, because I think it's important to complexify it and say, like, we're not also a monolith, and we also have a variety of issues we care. We care about inflation and the healthcare and the economy, and we do care about immigration, but that's just one thing. And I think it's really important for folks to hear, particularly from students' perspectives, of like, no, it's just as complex and nuanced as your own towns or your own cities where you're from, and but there are a lot of different reasons that motivate people. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for bringing the stats as well. Very impressed. You did the research, which I'm really always impressed by that. All right, next up, we're going to go up to Massachusetts and Brandeis. So I'm going to go to Mandy. And Mandy, I know you're a poli-sci major, you're president of Vote Dice, but the thing I'm really curious about you is you have a really special interest in federal election campaign finance, which is not the typical thing you hear from college students being like, what's your top interest? Like federal election campaign finance, even though it's a huge issue. So just tell me a little bit about like, how did that interest come about? And why do you feel like it's really important for students to not only track who they may vote for, but also how elections are funded? So I'll pass it to you.
Sure. So this interest actually started because I was working on a state election in 2022 in Massachusetts. It was a lieutenant governor's race, and there was another candidate in the race who unexpectedly had a super PAC get involved on their side, and I was shocked by this. I did not realize all of us were very much thrown off by a super PAC suddenly getting involved in a lieutenant governor's race in Massachusetts. It was very surprising, and I just remember thinking, this shouldn't be happening. Like, it's ridiculous that now there's this entity involved in the race that can raise endless amounts of money, not disclose its donors. I mean, technically, like, there are all sorts of ways to get around disclosing your donors if you're part of a super PAC, and just like spend an endless amount on the race and take infinite donations from individual people who have an interest in getting candidate elected, whereas my campaign had been just like entirely grassroots. So I was pretty miffed by it, to say the least. And the candidate I was working for ended up losing to the candidate that had the super PAC on their side, so that hurt. And I just remember thinking, I've got to dedicate my life to figuring out how to deal with these sorts of things. And so the next semester I just happened to get a professor that I was taking a class with who studies campaign finance happened to have an opportunity for a research assistant to study campaign finance. And I said, oh, please, like it has to be me. I need to know more about this. And so I ended up getting to work with him, and I've studied a lot of like sort of donor analysis, what are the characteristics of large dollar versus small dollar donors, who donates to what in addition to campaigns, that sort of thing. And then I also, through classes, I've written a lot of essays about seminal campaign finance legislation. And just, it's something that's very interesting to me because it actually, who gets funding determines who can win elections a lot of the time, because it's really hard to advertise if you don't have funding from major donors, because a lot of places, including my home state of Florida, it's very expensive to buy TV spots. It's very expensive to buy internet ads that are targeted to voters in a specific location. So I think it's important to know who donates to the people that you're voting for, because that can sort of determine what that person's going to act like in office, because they're going to feel some sort of responsibility to the people who donated to them. And also, if you see someone who normally donates to Republicans and starts donating to one specific Democratic race, you're going to think, what's special about that Democrat? Or same with vice versa. If Democrats are donating to a specific Republican, why do they want that person to win? Usually it's a primary where people are switching around. So it's like, think to yourself, is it because they think that candidate's weaker? Is it because they think that that candidate is actually going to be willing to work with them once they're in office? The policies, you can learn a lot about a person's policies based on who's donating to them. So, and this information is mostly public. Obviously some super PAC dark money stuff, not so public, but you can go on fec.gov and you can look up a person's name and see all the federal races they've contributed to. That's a lot of the research that I was doing. If you've ever donated to a race, your name's on there. So it's it's a very interesting field to me. I know a lot of people don't think it's so sexy, but I love it. And I think I'll probably end up working on campaign finance issues in my career. I hope I get that chance. We'll see.
That's awesome, Mandy. That's an incredible story. And I love that you took like a moment of challenge and trial and be like, actually, I'm gonna find out a lot more about this. And I love that you use community engaged research with your professor to be like, let me dive deeper into this and what this looks like. And I do think you're right. Like following the money is important to sort of see how do our elected officials on every level, on a state level, on a national, et cetera, who funds them, who's susceptible to what does this look like? And it's a great resource as well. Thank you so much for dropping that. So everyone knows to go to fec.gov to check that out as well. Very fascinating. All right, so now we're going to get to the fun part, which I told them all we're going to have a conversation amongst these four incredible leaders. If you haven't already, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and be putting questions in the Q&A. So if one of our panelists said something really specific or you want to learn more about it, please feel free to drop a question in the Q&A, and my amazing colleague Laura is going to be looking at those questions for later on in the program. But first, I'm going to sort of talk to our amazing panelist and just sort of say the first question, which is this is a huge one, but it's just sort of naming it. And the reality is that college students always get framed as like this huge sort of monolith of a voting block. Like, how are college students going to turn out to vote? What does this look like? What are their issues? But then there's also a lot of questions that are coming up with college students, like what's the voter turnout actually going to be? There's a large number of college students who are also uncommitted or not interested in maybe voting. We have a large group of college students who are disenfranchised or not eligible to vote. But we also have some students who are not really sure and if they're going to vote or not already in swing states. We also have some students who are being targeted regularly. So the first question I wanted to say is just in all this context, when you yourself as college students, when you're going through hard times and you're like, I don't know if my vote matters. I don't know if I want to vote or not. Well, I know we've all had those things. What do you tell a college student who's sort of on the fence, a college student who's eligible to vote, but on the fence if they want to get involved or not? How would you sort of talk with them about why should they vote or consider voting in their local, state, or national elections? What sort of would you all sort of say from your own experience and your own hard times of what makes you persevere and still believe in the power of vote to be one method of change in the world? And I'll open that up to anybody who wants to go first.
I don't mind starting. I
Go ahead.
was in 2022, I was canvassing for it was Massachusetts people love to go canvass in New Hampshire. And Brandeis Democrats, which is a group that I'm president of, went up to New Hampshire to do some canvassing for a whole slate of candidates in Manchester. And one of the candidates that we canvassed for, her race came down to one vote. And it was a local, I think it was a state rep. Not I think it was a state rep. Yeah. The race came down to one vote and then it ended up going down to a recount and then she ended up losing. But like that's what happens in local elections because so many fewer people are filling out their ballot as it gets further down. And those races are very close. And I understand there's kind of a higher burden to vote in local elections because you're not going to know as much about the candidates. But there are so many excellent resources that you can use to read about candidates in these local elections. I personally use Vote 411, which is from League of Women Voters. I find it very informative, but your local newspaper makes endorsements. And like you can also, there might be people in your life who really do care about those races. It's not as easy as voting in a national election where you're inundated with information about the candidates, but those are the people who are most accessible to you. Those are the people who are legislating about your community, and those are the races that are the closest. So your vote really does matter, even if you don't necessarily live in a swing state or even a swing district congressionally. Your local races are probably going to be quite close.
I love that. That's a great example, Mandy, of that and why it's important to show up and do that as well. Others, what do you all say to your friends, to your classmates? You're like, yeah, I don't really know. I don't know if it's really worth it. Like I'd fill out this whole form. I don't know, or maybe Vincent, I'll go to you next.
Hi. Yeah, I would say it depends on it's all individual, depends on the person. Sometimes people are more willing to have their mind opened or listen to others than some are more willing than others. So, but something I like to say is basically, do you receive financial aid? Do you have the Pell Grant? Do you get these things? Because I do. I get the Pell Grant. I get I don't know why my iPad's doing the weird Zoom thing. But I get the Pell Grant. I get the state grant for here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Yeah, I forgot to tell you about that. Commonwealth. And that really depends on politicians, on our elected officials. Like the majority of the people in my community college get these grants and need them in order to study. And so if we have elected officials who want to defund those grants, or maybe even want to add to those grants, add to our financial aid, then that is really important. The money that also goes into our schools, and and also regulations on what schools can do with the money they get, also really matters on the grants the school gets. So, because a lot of times a lot of universities might get good tax breaks and a lot of money, could even be from the government, and then they're not even investing it into their students. They'll invest it into, like, oh look, we got a new basketball court, and it's like the other one was fine. So pretty much it's that it really does directly affect you. And also, we're a commuter school, so the community college, so roads here in Pennsylvania, we're known for our potholes. We're getting a little bit better by the day, but the roads, things like car regulations, there's a lot of different things, but your elected officials are directly impacting your daily life and how much money is in your wallet. And it's not just about like the stock market or whatever. It's about how much money you're getting for your education, how much that money that your education is actually putting into you, and whether transportation costs are efficient and effective for you, and whether you can afford them. Same with housing as well for those living off campus.
I love that. No, I love that you make it personal, Vincent. Sort of saying like, no, this is you. If you're a college student, you get financial aid, or if you travel on the roads to school, you do that. It's personal for you. So finding the thing that matters to you to lend your voice to as well. Amanjot or Karime, I'd love to hear you all as well. Tell me like what specifically, like when you're like, wait, you're talking maybe to the person locally, and you're like, I don't know if I'm gonna vote. I don't know. I think it's all corrupt anyway. It doesn't matter, or whatever it may be. Like, how do you convince people like, no, this is worth voting. This is worth your voice.
Sure, I'll go ahead. This is something that I've thought about long before I even came to college. Neither of my parents have ever voted in an election. Amongst the Asian American community, there is a significant amount of apathy. A large part of that probably results from the fact that many Asian Americans have immigrated from countries that are not particularly democratic or have gone through a lot of political conflict and turmoil over the last few decades. And so I have a bit of a unique perspective on apathy in the sense that I think it's somewhat valid and I understand. Like, I will usually, when I'm talking to an individual who tells me that they don't want to vote because it's hard to believe that their vote will actually change the system, or they know that a politician getting in office isn't going to magically fix the government, they're right about that. And that's fair. And I totally understand that perspective. And so, usually, when I hear people say that, I respond by being like, I hear you, but that's not actually the reason I'm voting. I recognize that the system isn't going to change, but I'm voting for my community. I'm voting for the people around me. Not because I don't like, I think that like whichever person is going to win in office is going to magically fix or change the system, or that like we're going to see these massive changes happen every 4 years, and like this is the election that actually determines it all. I don't really think that that necessarily resonates with a lot of people, and that kind of messaging can be exhausting for some. And so instead, I try and remind people that we vote because we can at least move the needle in some direction. We can at least get some of the policies we want to see enacted. So, on the local level, for example, yes, there might be a lot of things going on at the presidential or state level that might be disempowering. But at least if we vote here in Dane County, for instance, our mayor can make sure we have good public transit. We can make sure that affordable housing is built for students so that they're not worried about paying rent. We can look out for each other to some extent, even if we can't look out look out to each other in all of the ways that we want to. And I see voting as one tool in the toolbox of community engagement, that this is one of the ways in which we can work together as a unit to empower ourselves and to see the progress we want to see.
I love that, Almond. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Karime, I want to shout out real quick. You got a shout out for someone from your hometown who said you're representing EP so well, and they're so proud of you. So before you hop in, just let you know you're getting some shout outs as well in the chat. But tell us, what do you tell folks in Texas when they're also the same question, like, why should I get involved? What do you say?
Yeah, so glad Eagle Pass people are here. Love Eagle Pass. But going to the question, I think in Texas, especially college students are really apathetic towards politics, especially in a red state that has been red for a really, really long time. And one of my go-to answers and one of the ways I find in motivating people is by bringing in the numbers, which I know sometimes can be overwhelming, but numbers are important and they have big impact. For example, the margin of voting in Texas, we're not a swing state, but I'm a big believer that we're headed that way. In this 2018 Senate election between Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz, the difference was 214,921 votes. The 2020 presidential election was 631,221 votes of a difference. The amount of undergraduate college students in Texas is 630,621. If all the undergraduate students in Texas voted, we could make a difference in what way our swing states, or in what way our state swings in political parties. And for putting that information out there and doing that math and sharing that math with people is important because you can literally see that we could make a difference with these numbers.
I love it. I love it. I love you're thinking a big movement. You're like, this is not just you. It's just it's collective in the community what we could do together as well. Because I think that is a lot of people feel, whether in a red state or a blue state, they're like, oh, my state's already going to go this way, and only the presidential. Why should I care? And I love that you all have like highlighted the personal nature of it, the local nature of it, the complexity of it, and also acknowledging that the feelings are valid. That too often communities are disenfranchised, or they're talked about as like, hey, this is the silver bullet, vote for me, and that doesn't happen. But that still doesn't mean that voting cannot be one method of change that we use in our toolbox if you have the privilege and the right to access your right to vote. That we recognize that still too many people don't have that. All right, so because it's National Voter Education Week, I also want to ask you all about resources. All the time, I think there are amazing new resources out there that Mandy's already mentioned a couple, Vote 411, et cetera. But when you are thinking about your own information, whether it be like about voting or information, whether it be like influencers on TikTok or the news websites that you go to or resources you like to use to pass on to those, what are just one or two go-to resources that you rely on for your own voter education in terms of like either how to vote or how to keep an update on the issues that you'd recommend other people to check out or look into? And for this one, we can go in anyone. If you have one off the top of your head, we'll get started with you. All right, Vincent, your hands. Actually, well, I'm gonna Joe, and then we'll go Vincent.
All right. Um, this might not be the sexiest answer, but check your city clerk's website. Your city or municipal clerk. I think that is the number one best resource to check because that is where you're going to find the information that is relevant to how your particular election is going to work. And usually they'll also have information about who's on your ballot and like in which ward. In the state of Wisconsin, I also recommend myvote.wi.gov. My Vote is great. I've made like as part of JIPCO Vote, as part of this like nonprofit group that I work for, I've made voter guides for several states and I've had to reference a lot of states' websites to do so. And I can very proudly say that Wisconsin has, in my opinion, the most user-friendly election website ever. So use it. It has like a great what's on your ballot feature where you put in your address and your name and it will tell you exactly which candidates are going to be on your ballot and which party they're in. It's wonderful. It's so useful. Like, could not promote it enough.
I love that, and I love that you promote like go to your local election officials, go to their website, they have it as well. All right, Vincent, you had your hand up. I'll go to you.
Yeah, I just looked up this Wisconsin site. It is very pretty. This is like a pretty functionally good site.
Coming from the Commonwealth too, that's a
Yeah.
Midwestern compliment right there. So go ahead, Vincent.
So yeah, I usually like to now, I'm a bit of a nerd, so I like to I'm constantly question myself on whether I'm like, is this right for the people? What is, I try to challenge myself over and not just fall into like partisan thinking, and I want to actually see like what are the facts, right? I like to have for just general, the news, I try to have a wide array of sources. I will look at multiple resources. You can have a bit of like CNN or NBC or whatever, but you really should have as much as possible, and good accurate sources. I like international news even more, including for our own country, like BBC, Al Jazeera, France 24. These are good news sites. And also because especially if they're covering our news, this is more, this is on the national scale. They're going to be talking about they're not going to have a piece of their own for one side or the other. They're just going to be telling you the straight facts. But for specific issues, well, here in Pennsylvania, I like Spotlight PA. But for the specific issues, I will really try to, I mean, I'll be Googling things, and I'll usually try to rely on like think tanks or like the Brookings Institution, not Bipartisan Policy Center, really trying to see what does the data actually say. And I think that's really important because a lot of times, I mean, especially in this election, I'm sure we've all seen that there's cases where it's like two sides have just, I guess a big example. I hope everyone, if there's anyone from Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, everyone's doing all right. But as you can see, a big partisan football that's just, it shouldn't even be partisan, but suddenly has become like a partisan game, has been the FEMA response to the hurricane, to Hurricane Helene. And because now there's two sides basically saying completely different stories. And that's very bad for democracy. That's really bad. That should not be happening. But when that happens, you need to look at the facts, see what's happening. And often if there is a case like that, there's probably more of like a middle ground where both sides might have some kind of point. But either way, you got to look it up, and you can't just rely on, oh, this is my side. Oh, I like this guy, so I like this guy or gal. So that's what's right. You really got to look into everything, and think for yourself. Do your own research, as I say.
Love that. Thanks, Smith. That's another great example. Perry, Mary, or Mandy, other things you want to influence? Go ahead.
Um,
Oh,
We'll go
There
to
you go.
Carrie May first, then Mandy. Go ahead.
so like Mandy, I'm a big fan of Vote 411. The League of Women Voters is great, especially great in Texas. I'm also a big fan of Cricket Media, which is like a podcast media publication, and they have the podcast Vote Save America, which their podcasts go really in depth into different issues, especially around election time. But they also have a daily news podcast called What a Day, and they go over current events as well as the election. And I think this podcast is really great because it's not just like, I love NPR, but NPR's podcast can be very direct and straightforward and like a little bit boring. But Cricket Media and their podcast are fun, kind of like memes, very targeted towards Gen Z, which we really need right now. So definitely anything Cricket Media. The Vote Save America website, if you go to it, you can put in your address as well, and it'll take you and give you sort of a sample ballot of everything that's going to be in your specific district. And then the last resource that I love that's more Texas focused is a Texas Tribune voter guide. The Texas Tribune is a great news publication here in Texas. And personally, me, like the guides 411 and Vote America, even though they're great, they get like I get information overload. And the voter guide from the Texas Tribune is very like, here are the candidates, quick facts, move on to the next election that's going on in your district, which I appreciate. So those are my top three.
I love it. Awesome, Mandy. We'll go to you.
I am also a huge Crooked fan. Like, listen to Pod Save America every night to fall asleep. Like, love. Anyway, outside of Vote 411, which so helpful, I also my university is part of like a coalition of a couple schools that's part of that subscribes to Enact Your Vote, which like if there are any campus organizers listening, and also to my other panelists, like it's a really great program that when students sign up, they put in their address and then it notifies you when you have an election coming up and when you need to request your mail-in ballot or when early voting starts, everything. It's so helpful, I think, especially because you can easily lose track of like primaries and municipal elections because they're all on different dates and you might not even know you have one coming up. So Enact Your Vote has been amazing. We've definitely been trying to do a lot of work promoting it on campus, and that's been very helpful for me to keep track of dates and know when I need to request things and all that sort of stuff because I vote by mail because I still vote in my home state. So that's been awesome. And then, yeah, also seconding Vote Save America, you can also like see how to get involved in races if you're looking to take it a step further. So highly recommend checking out that website. Can I recommend those resources enough?
Awesome. I'm glad you all had a variety of different resources and different things to look at as well. I will say in defense of public radio and NPR that some of us older folks also like just radio and the basic boring stuff, but I get it. I understand. All right. So one of the things I want to do now with our time left is I'm actually going to ask each of you maybe one of the rapid fire questions towards the end of our time. And one of the huge things that we actually got in the chat, I want to uplift, is I think it's a really important question. I think I'm going to go to I'm gonna Joe and Vincent for this one, is I've got a question that like not all students necessarily have access to the right to vote, particularly if you're an international student on maybe a student visa and your voting rights aren't necessarily in the US, but maybe another country, or if for any reason you've lost the right to vote or your right is disenfranchised. But they still want to be involved somehow. They want to be involved in the voting process or et cetera. What are some ways that people can get involved and help maybe supporting the democratic process or the voting process in the US if they don't necessarily have the ability to actually vote in the election, if they're not eligible to, or they've lost the right to? And I'll pass that to our local elected officials so they have other ways people could volunteer or get involved if you have anything that comes to mind.
Sure, I can go first. Um, I wouldn't say first election official, not elected, but um, I will say, I think for international students, this does depend on where you are. I can say at least at UW-Madison and in the city of Madison, you don't have to be a US citizen to be an election official, actually. There's just a limit to what you can do. So like your only thing that you can do to work the polls on election day is you can be a greeter. So you can greet people as they come to the election or like they come to the polling place. You can't be involved in the registration process or the ID process, but being a reader is one way that you can at least see what it's like to be at the polls, see the energy, see what election day looks like, which is really cool and exciting. But beyond that, I always like to try and encourage students, both those who just can't vote and also those who do vote, to get involved in other ways that aren't voting. Largely, I like to try and tell people to lobby, to email their representatives, to attend candidate forums, to be involved in civic engagement organizations on their campuses, to advocate. Luckily, you don't have to be a citizen to have like an opinion and go out and share your voice with administration or with elected officials and tell them like, hey, I live here, I've seen this issue and I want to get it resolved. I think that that's one of the most empowering things about our democracy is that anybody can do that and be part of that energy. So like by all means, go for it. If you see a problem that you want to fix, channel that energy, go out there.
I love that. I love that. That's good. Actually, I'm going to go, Vincent, for you for another question. You actually you just said the word "do your research," and it was like "do that research." And that resonated with someone in our chat, and they said, "How can you actually how do you encourage your peers to like look at the facts and do the research before they go out to vote? How do you try to influence people to like, hey, really do your research? How do you convince someone that it's worth taking the time to do that before they vote on an election? Like, why should people go look up what their local county bursar's office election and what their issues are, things like that? How do you encourage your peers to get informed?
I mean, do you want to sound like an idiot? Like, you should know, you should try to know what you're talking about, you know? Like, I think people should want to know as a basic exercise in human experience that we are curious people and we should want to know the truth. And I think that we should that you should, as just any person, try to seek out the facts to the greatest extent, even if it makes you uncomfortable or it's different from what you expect. I would say that's the main thing. Also, and this is for those who really want, who want to be involved, who want to know, that you should, you should just seek out this information. And like I said, I would be happy to recommend nonpartisan sources. Like I said, I think a lot of times international news can be very good. Vote 411, very good. Here in PA, as I said, we have Spotlight PA. So I'm very happy to recommend these kinds of resources. But for those who are genuine in that they want to know more, they want to actually learn as much as they can, then I would just say partially do your research through good resources that are trustworthy and that have other sources, they do their own study and they don't have a clear tilt of one way or the other. They're not working with a campaign or something. Look after those resources and also just do some research on what these offices are about, because I mean, like here in Pennsylvania, for example, we have, and I don't know how I feel about it, but we, on the county level, we elect our controller, and on the state level, we elect our auditor general, which is basically the same thing. The person who audits and will go after, financial kind of watchdog person who's supposed to be kind of nonpartisan and whatnot. But the thing is these are partisan positions. And so we end up with Democrats and Republicans running campaigns and often making partisan speeches for a position that's basically just supposed to be an accountant. You're an accountant. It's an accountant. And it's, I think a lot of times most voters are going to be looking at this and just being like, oh, Democrat, yeah, or oh, Republican, nice. And it's not the same as if you're just electing a member of Congress. This is the person that's going to keep a steady watch over the states or counties' finances. And so I think you should try to just understand how what these positions entail to the best of your ability. And that would be public information from your county, from your city, from your state, in the nation. And also, I did want to say a little thing about the previous question that Amanjot answered.
Yeah.
What was the question again, though?
It was about how can international students or students who don't have the right or ability to vote, how can we get involved?
Yeah, I just want to say that I've met people who have been from other countries. I remember when I was younger in the Hillary campaign, there was someone from Poland. I remember just this summer there was a guy from Italy, and there are people who literally would find like resources to try to just come here to help out with a campaign or whatever. So it's like, trust me, even if you're not a citizen, even if you're for whatever reason can't vote, you can be involved. And for even maybe then, yeah, it would even be a stronger argument, because then you can look at someone who might be super apathetic and be like, and they're like, why should I even vote? It's like, because I can't, please. So I think that, yeah, it's again, poll watcher, poll worker is definitely a way. Community service, community involvement, campaign work, if that's what you want to do. I mean, I would love if in the future to see about helping a campaign, or at least being involved in something in like Peru or Brazil or something, because that would be very interesting, right? And also, especially for those that come from a different country culture, like and for my fellow panelists and the audience today, I would encourage you to learn about another country's kind of elections and culture, because that is also educational, on seeing how everything that we take for granted or that comprises our experience is not the same for those in Canada or Mexico, and those are just our neighbors. And then there's 190 plus other countries with their own experiences, and many of them democratic, many of them not, but they all have their different experiences on how society works. And definitely worth learning about that, and then reflecting on our own country and seeing what we could do better, what could be worse, and what we have to do to make sure it stays as good or gets better as it is.
Awesome. Thanks, Vincent. All right, Mandy, I'm going to come to you for one of the next ones, and the current man, I'm going to come to you to wrap us up. All right. So, Mandy, I'm curious, if you could have a magic wand, you are the head of the FEC, or you can make one change on a state, national, or federal level that would create better voter access or voter education. What is one change you would love to see made? With your expertise, or maybe so this is the time you can change federal election campaign finance right now. What would be the one thing, or what would be something you would do generally for voting access?
If I'm changing federal election campaign finance, I'm banning super PACs. But if I'm just talking about like voter access, I'd love to see universal mail-in voting, and just like, you can guarantee to get a mail-in ballot every year to your house. I think that'd be really wonderful. Also, if not that, then I'd love to see Election Day be a federal holiday, because, a lot of people can't get off work and they might not be able to go to early voting because it's in more limited hours. And even if like they have gotten off of work by 5 p.m. and the polls are still open, then like the lines are going to be huge, because that's when everyone else is getting off of work. So either federal holiday for Election Day or universal mail-in voting, because, I think we should ease the burden as much as possible for people who want to vote.
I love it. And also, we'll get rid of super PACs at the same time. We'll just do all three. 1, 2, 3, where it may be. All right. All right. And the last one, Curry May, I'm gonna come to you. It's a big one. It's the big one, but it's gonna wrap it up. It's just going forward. There's a lot of rhetoric around what's going to happen with college students in this election. What are they like? What are they about, et cetera? And too often you all are talked about as a monolith. And what I think y'all showed today is that you are all united in a passion for this, but you all have different interest areas, different entry points, different states, different issues, different communities. We're so both interdependent, but also diverse in your interests, in your entry points into this. But in general, when this election is said and done, and 2024 is done, what do you hope that your generation of current college students will be known for in terms of protecting or expanding the right to vote? What do you hope when they look back 40 years from now and there's a new panel and they're talking about like, oh, that generation in 2024, those college students, what do you want your generation to be known for in terms of your how you all responded to expanding the right to vote or protecting and voting?
I would love to see a historic like college 18 to 29-year-old voter turnout this election, especially in Texas. I would love for Texas to go blue too, obviously. But I want us to vote more. If we start, the more we empower students to vote, the more this will become a habit and will just become our normal. So let's continue to advocate for ourselves, continue to encourage others to vote, bring out the numbers, bring out the passion, and just keep organizing because we're voting for the future of ourselves, but also the future of others. And let's make voting a habit. Let's make this part of our lives all the time.
I love that. That's amazing. And that's a great spot to end our panel today. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. You're doing incredible work. I know your time is a gift and your presence is even more of a gift. So thank you so much for giving us both your time and your presence today. And thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing as well. One resource I want to plug real quick to everyone in the chat as well is that we do have a website at Campus Compact where we've sort of put together some amazing resources and other organizations who are doing great work on voting. So if you don't know where to start, we have a pretty good comment FAQ that will point you to some of these resources the students referenced and other resources as well. So I want to encourage you all to check that out if you can. But thank you all again so much for coming to today's panel. Thank you to the panelists for the wonderful work you're doing. And I hope that it is true that your all's generation becomes known as a generation that set the standard, that you all will continue to vote at high levels and be engaged with that. So with that, that'll wrap up our panel. If you have any other follow-up questions for our panelists or anything else, you can feel free to reach out to Laura or myself. I'll put my email in the chat for anyone who would love to get in contact with these amazing panelists. As you can see, they are incredible Newman Fellows representing their campuses and incredible leaders overall. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day and have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye-bye.